the human experiential way. One of the difficult things about the void, one of the difficult things about entering into experience as yourself, is that we're not all designed to deal with the consequences of experience in the same way. You know, one man's meat, another man's poison. We're not all designed to deal with things in the same way that we're not all designed to have the same kind of path. And when you're looking at the experiential way, you know, what you get to see is that not only are we being driven along a specific flow in our lives, but at the same time, we're also given the equipment of how to deal with it. First of all, the way itself. If you start here in the root center with the 41st gate, remember this is the start codon. What you're looking at is an enormous pressure. And it's an enormous pressure because what it's trying to do is it's trying to fix the emotional system, fix the emotional desire wave, and start it off at the right point. Start it off at the right point. And the right point, if I were to try to translate that into another way of understanding, the right point is the absolute place of hunger. And when I first tried to describe the 41 to the 35, I talked about how they were a kind of fuel gauge. And when you were looking at the 41 has the potential to read empty, but only the 35 has the potential to read full. And everything about that gauge is going from the empty to the full, and then in the cycle of the abstract, emptying it out and starting again. So one of the things to understand about the 41st gate is that in order for a new experience to begin, one has to start from a place of deep and absolute hunger, emptiness. You know, in the mystical expression, when you speak of emptiness, that emptiness is never a goal, that emptiness is where you start. You start with empty and you fill up, you sample, you taste, you go through the process, you empty out, and then you can fill up again. And for the abstract being, this is a very important concept to grasp. You see, the experience is something that has to take you from that place of hunger to that place of being satiated. And everybody on the abstract road is trying to get to the 35th gate of satiation. But if you look carefully at what it is to be satisfied or not, you will see that that's logical. There is no true satiation. If there were, the hunger would end. And the abstract does not want to permit the hunger to end. So it's one of the things to understand about the abstract process. It's why people who are caught in the abstract can get into belief systems that never require any proof for them. Because there is no real satiation available in the abstract process. None. And why? The 30th gate. I mean, I really love this gate. I mean, love it in the sense that it brings me the best jokes. I mean, I don't know if everybody has my sense of humor, but it brings the best jokes. The fates. I am a mystic. For me, it's very easy to anthropomorphize the forces and to be able to identify with transcendent fields of energy. It seems natural to me. I like the concept of gods, even though I know it's physics. And I deeply understand the physics, but it's fun to dress the physics up. You know, it's fun to put a dress on the moon. I like putting a dress on the moon. It makes me feel good. But there's something in that. The fates, they're fascinating. It's like there's this, well, let's make it go this way. You know, these tricky goddesses looking down and ready to spin it out, ready to cut it. And it's the thing I love so much about the 30th gate, because the 30th gate stands there and says, you think I didn't say anything bad. They're listening. The 41st gate says, desire. Oh, fantasy. Oh, I love that. Oh, it would be great. Oh, I want it. Oh, I want it. Now, please. And then he tries to figure out how to get there. Fantasy is great at trying to create a structural program. Well, have you noticed about fantasies? Fantasies are wonderful, because everything works the way you want. I mean, this is the great trap of the fantasy, right? The great trap of the fantasy is no matter what the fantasy is, you win. Always, right? So you got this fantasy and you got this strategy. Okay, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, and I'm going to get what I want. And then the goddesses sit in the 30th gate and they go, boop, 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 boop. Not what you want. What you get. What you get. Everybody's trying to make everything a responsibility. We don't earn anything. It's not up to us what we get. We get what we get. Each and every one of us are designed to get something. Whether we get that we got it is another story, but we get it. Not only that, we never get it the way we think we want to get it. We don't. Because the fates step in and say, look, it's not that simple. This is not logic. This is not 1 and 1 equals 2. It isn't. As a matter of fact, there is no such thing. And the beauty of the 30th gate is that it gives you the 6 archetypes of how you live with the vagaries of the fates. How you survive it. You know, I'm a 5th line being. Irony is my way. This is what the fates have taught me. You know, when the big foot steps on my head, there's this irony inside that says, wasn't that funny? And it happened this way? And it's like, oh, thank you. And you begin to see that we are given our protection. You don't get to live out the archetype of what you are. You don't get to live out your profile until you've handled your characteristics. If you haven't worked out what it is to be emotional, to be sacral, to be splenic, to be G-centered, to be ego, to be throat, to be mind, if you haven't worked out all that stuff, if you haven't worked out what it is to deal with your type and your strategy and your authority and your openness and your not self, don't listen to what I'm about to tell you because it won't make any sense. You know, you can go home now, have the afternoon off. Because the reality is, yeah, right. No refunds. The magic is that we are given the right equipment to handle the fact that life isn't what we want it to be, what we expect it to be. And the beauty of that is that that's not a negative. What we want is so narrow and so unclear and so much a lie. And what we get is so deeply misunderstood because we're stuck in our own lies. And we don't see the beauty of what's right there in front of us. And the gods are a delight. You know, they come in and they say, okay, this is the way you have to deal with it. You know, this is the way you have to deal with the fact that you think that this is going to happen and you fall flat on your face. The first line of the 30 is called composure. Balance in the face of disorder. All first lines are foundations. You know, this is the very basis upon which everything is built. And in the genetic continuity of things, this is what it's all about. The most solid foundation you can have is the recognition that it is all disorder. There is no order to be found until you go through the process. And then, you know, we have these intellectual gifts. And then we can put all kinds of constructs on top of what we've experienced. But the first line is here to be at peace with wonder. You know, when I taught the first of the mystical courses, I gave mystical keynotes for the lines. And the first line is the line of wonder. It's the line of awe. It's this wow. And you see, the whole thing about it is that this wonder, this awe, is absolutely essential. When you're walking down and you suddenly fall flat on your face, the wonder of it. You know, for years when people would come to the Ibiza event, I would always tell them the same thing. The countryside is very beautiful. But if you're going to go walking in the countryside, don't sightsee while you're walking, because you'll fall flat on your face. This is what Ibiza does to people. If you want to look around, stand still and look around, and you'll be safe. And you know, this is one of those wonderful moments where, you know, you get to see what the fates do and how you deal with it. You know, there you are walking along and you're looking around, you fall flat on your face, you know. Bells go off. The fates are always getting in the way, and you never know what you're going to fall into. You don't. It's all disorder. It's all chaos. That's what the abstract sees. You know, whenever I'm dealing with abstract people and I tell them, you know, there's this order and everything, and they say, chaos, chaos. Because that's what the abstract way is. That is what it is to be human. To be human is to walk along in this huge chaotic mess. But you know, if you're going to be a first-line being and you're going to be an investigator, you have to be calm and composed in order to investigate. This is your way. And it's not like you can decide. If you've got a first line in your profile, you cannot decide to be composed in times of disorder. Nice concept. You know, I'm sure that your psychologist, therapist, whatever, could tell you the same thing. It doesn't mean that you're going to be calm and composed in times of disorder. Not at all. I mean, that's only a possibility if you're correct. I mean, if you're operating the way you're supposed to operate, you're going to naturally be composed. I've gotten to the point where I find irony almost boring because everything's ironic. I mean, everything's ironic. And that you have to see when you're operating correctly, these themes out of the 30th gate, they're your armor for dealing with what seems to be the chaos and the disorder of the way. The second line is pragmatism. And this is not balance in the face of disorder, but this is balance between extremes. Pragmatism is always about finding the balance between extremes. So what happens to somebody who meets this fate? What happens to somebody who is a second line? What are you going to get in this life? Extremes. Ask any second line being. They'll tell you. And you see, for you, it's being able to find the balance in that. But finding the balance doesn't mean that you're automatically balanced when you're going in. Remember that you have to practice. And you go from one extreme to the other until finally you can get to that place of balance. And you're not going to get there unless you're operating correctly. I mean, there's nothing more horrible than the 30th gate. I watched, when we had the Uranus and the Neptune transit to the 30th gate, what kind of impact that had on people. They were going nuts. They don't like it. And all these people had all these plans. I mean, after all, dealing with an organization, I deal with a lot of this, planning and this and that, and things would go wrong, and people would have crises, and it was all over the place. And then everybody feels like, I'm lost, because something gets in the way and you didn't expect it. But life is like that. There is no clean line in life. I mean, you've got all these intersecting fractal lines. You've got all these forces flying around. It's never what you think. That's why this whole business about following a path, a way, what's the point? You're only going to discover that it's not true. Or you're going to lie to yourself because you want it to be true. But it's not you. And you see, each and every one of us have a built-in way to just deal with this human process. And remember that we're dealing with two things. You know, I'm a 5'1", I'm wearing it on my head today. My body has incredible composure. I mean, my body is so good at being composed in times of anything. Talk about balance of disorder. You know, I've pumped every kind of chemical, plant, you name it, inside like this. And not because of this brain, not because of this personality and who it thinks it is. My body is really good in dealing with disorder. It stays very composed. And it's one of the things for you to see that we've got a differentiation here between what is the way the personality deals with things. My personality deals with things through irony. My body deals with things through composure. They're different. And it can be very, very confusing because it is so different unless you're correct. And then you see how it works. The passenger is so fucked up. You know, the passenger always wants to be the body. My personality would love to be composed. It's not. It's not at all. It's full of all kinds of irony and nonsense, but it's not composed. You know, my form, that's something else. But my personality looks at that and says, hey, yo, how come you and not me? And for so many beings, imagine what it's like to be the other way around. You're a 1-3, you're a 1-4. You know, you have a personality, who you think you are, that can be very composed, and your body is on chaos duty, you know? And your body's not composed at all, and your personality is screaming, there's something wrong with us, we have a problem. You know, we have this huge gap between who we think we are and what moves this vehicle. And again, you know, knowledge doesn't help. It doesn't help to know that. You know, your mind gets in the way. And your mind can't pay attention to all these things. It can't. You know, it's my favorite trip about people who like dolphins. There are a lot of crazy people on the planet who think dolphins are really intelligent. And every once in a while, I grab one of them and I look at them and I say, you know, a dolphin has to concentrate all the time on when to breathe. Now, we don't, eh? I mean, that's not our thing. Imagine what that means to have to think about when you breathe all the time. I mean, they can't go to sleep alone. Someone's got to wake them up so that they go and breathe. Now, if you're spending all your time thinking about breathing, you are not dealing with quantum physics. You know, it just does not happen. That huge big brain of theirs that everybody's so impressed with, it's all focused on, I better breathe now. Imagine if you had to think about breathing. I mean, think about it. Imagine you had to think about breathing. Is it time? Okay. People, you know, this whole business about, I have a choice, and I'm in charge, and I'm in control. I mean, if the gods had given us responsibility to run these bodies, we would still be single-cell amoebas. Because that's all we could handle. Nothing more. And even that's tough. I mean, I don't even want to deal with, you know, the core of that cell. I want to be responsible for organizing the genetic chain. And I mean, please. And then people think that they're in charge of their lives. This is up to me, and that's up to me, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do that. And then they say, no choice? Oh, that's not true. You know? It's wonderful. Extraordinary ignorance. But of course, to accept that you are choiceless and helpless is an extraordinary grace. I mean, it's not something easy for us. You can see that. We're not designed for that. It's not like it's given to us on a platter. Each and every one of us are simply given a possibility in form to experience consciousness. And to recognize that as passengers, we are not in charge of our lives, our vehicles, the options, the lack of them. And that the moment that we stop being so damn concerned about it is the moment we get to see where we're actually going, what's actually going on, and we're well equipped. So when you look at the 30th gate and you think about the way in which we are designed to work through the experiential way, remember, that's both the way we're designed to react to it physically and the way we're designed to react to it within the personality, within the way in which we think about ourselves. I love the third line. I mean, I have this deep affection for this process. And it's a line of resignation. And it's perhaps one of the greatest of all gifts. It is the acceptance of what is. I mean, the line itself is very beautiful. It says, the awareness and manifestation of the law of regeneration, the laws of karma, reincarnation and resurrection. The feeling to accept what is. When you watch third line beings in their life, and I've watched so many, there is this power to continue. This incredible power in them. It's like sixth line beings who go through that first Saturn stage. When I used to do readings for sixth line beings who were beyond 30, the very first thing I would say to them is, congratulations on surviving. And they would know precisely what I meant. This third line process is really something, and it's rooted in the only way that you can deal with the trial and error of life is to realize there's no blame, there's no fault, there's no shame. That it's the way of discovery. And it's the way of unique discovery. It's very beautiful. And you have to see that if you're a third line being, no matter what befalls you in your life, that this is the only protection you have for your spirit. There is no other protection. It is what it is. Lao Tzu, shit happens. It is what it is. It's the beauty of acceptance. And then you cut away all of this, phony critical illusion stuff. And then you finally begin to see what's here to be seen. Anyway, it's a great line. Fourth line, burnout. Most people think of burnout as being very negative. I mean, it has that kind of connotation. But the thing about the fourth line being, and what you can understand from this line, is that they are here to go to the depth of that experience no matter what it costs them. Remember something about the fourth line being. The fourth line being is the great infecting force. This room, you got a fourth line being comes in with a cold, everybody's fucked. I mean, the chances are that they're going to give at least 30% of the room that cold. Because they're carriers. This is part of their influence. Now, by the way, getting a cold from somebody is valuable. I mean, it's valuable in terms of the immune system. Not necessarily pleasant to go through it. The fourth line being has this capacity to be able to influence. But in order for them to have the strength to influence, they cannot just... Think about it another way. The fourth line being creates networks. This is the way that their opportunism works. They have these networks. And the whole thing about that network is that whatever experience the fourth line being goes through, they're not finished with that experience unless they put it out through the whole network. I mean, that's their role. I mean, after all, that's what their influence is all about. That's what they're here for. Now, most of them burn out on that track. Like the broken telephone story. There's a certain point where you just can't finish the circuit anymore. And it's very difficult for them. But burnout is not, in that sense, negative. But it does mean that when they're dealing with the experiential way, that their goal in that experience is about getting all of that information out as far as it will go. And again, the underlying theme of the experiential way is to get the information across to others, to share it. The other thing is, the fourth line being is deeply impacted by the fourth color. And it's something that I'll deal with later when we're looking at PHS, looking at primary health system, and looking at the way in which our bodies are driven, and the kinds of things that are necessary for our bodies. And one of the things about color is that the fourth color transfers. It's never still. It's never still. And the whole thing about a fourth line being is that a fourth line being is pulled towards this never being still until they can impact everyone in that circuit. This is where the burnout comes from. And one of the things about fourth line beings is that in the tradition, you would have, for example, if you had a master with disciples, and I'm not just speaking of the Christian structure, but just the basic structure. Usually it was between 7 and 15, the number that would be allowed to be around a particular master. Now the master is a fourth color theme. And it's very important to understand that the potential to be able to share the personal experience as a fourth line being is limited to that fractal. If they can fulfill that fractal, there's no burnout. But most fourth line beings do not operate correctly. And in a sense, they don't know when it ends. And they keep on trying to bring something out where it goes beyond the point where it's of any value to anyone else. And of course, in that, they suffer. I go through phases in my process where certain aspects of design or profile or whatever it is something that I suddenly find myself paying attention to and noticing certain things about it. And in doing the daily radio transit stuff that I do, every time I get to a fourth line day, there's always something inside of me, that clicks into areas that I don't normally talk about. This investment that the fourth line has to make in experience. And that is often where they burn out. They put so much of themselves into the experience that they never really get the chance to bring the experience out to others. Many of them burn out on the way. As a fifth line personality, the fifth line is irony, and it's recognition and dedication to transitory goals. It's so wonderful for me, this sic transit gloria mundi, this too shall pass. It's one of the most magical things about the experiential way. When I look at it as from a heretical fifth line perspective, I see that it's all transitory. It doesn't matter. It actually makes it quite amusing. I watch the impact, the way things work, the oddities, the similarities, the coincidences, all of these things. And there's a wonderful joke in all of it. I guess it's why I like the jokes. I like seeing ignorance as humor, because at least it saves you from crying all the time. How funny it can be, how funny life is. The moment that you're disconnected from life being difficult, you begin to see that it's rather amusing. It's really good entertainment. And irony for me is a way of seeing the humor in just about anything. To see how funny it is to be right and wrong and there and not. And of course, for the heretic, there is no other way. There isn't. It's the only way that they can deal with things. What's really surprising to me is the way in which the fates deal with the sixth line. This line of enforcement, the discipline to maintain right action. And then you begin to see that until you get to the sixth line, the fates are just throwing spanners in the mix. They're just getting in your way. And they're getting in your way so you'll just simply differentiate. But the moment you see that focus on the sixth line, it changes. When it gets to the sixth line, it gets right back down to the basics. Right action is everything. The only way you're here to go through experience is as right action. There is no other way. Sixth line beings are the most vulnerable beings on the planet. They're the good to die young. And they're the old that die too soon. You know, this is a sixth-line being. Fragile as fragile can be. You know, like, these kind of silver workers, where they hammer the silver. They get hammered for 30 years. And if you're really lucky, maybe something comes out of that. Maybe something comes out of that long enough that it can sort of sit up there on the roof. And it's very, very difficult to express how much pressure is actually on sixth-line beings without sounding alarmist. It was like polio. I used to do this bit, and then I got too many letters from people who knew people who were having this, and it was a funny feedback. When I was a kid, when I was in grade school, was the polio epidemic, and I can remember children getting it, and it was an enormous scare. And then, of course, the Salk vaccine came, and then you take these sixth-line beings that had polio, that were able to, stop it, basically. And they would go up on the roof, and they would just basically deal with their handicap, whatever it brought to them as a handicap. And then they come off the roof, and all of a sudden, over the last 3 or 4 years, we hear about post-polio syndrome. And there's all these sixth-line beings who had polio when they were kids, where nothing happened for 20 years in between. They get to post-Chiron, bang, there it is. And it's one of the things about the sixth-line process and how important it is to understand something. The enforcement of right action is never the privilege of a sixth-line being in their first 30 years. Because in their first 30 years, they don't live out their sixth-line theme. They live out the third-line trial and error of pessimism and martyrdom and trial and error and mistakes and all of that. And that every sixth-line being, when they get to their post-Chiron phase in life, has to meet exactly the same forces they met in that first Saturn cycle. But they have to meet it with the enforcement of right action. Oh, what a trap. Oh. See, those forces that you met before you went up on the roof, they're waiting. They're waiting. It's like these animals that can't climb up the building, but they know at some point you're going to come off that roof. And they're all down there waiting. And it's not the same people. That's something to really grasp. It will be the same kind of archetypes. And you will see very clearly as a sixth-line being that those forces that were there in that first Saturn cycle, the forces that tempted you with love, with this, with that, whatever, the forces that hurt you, the forces that pleased you, whatever the case may be, they return. They return. And how you deal with them then, this is what it is to be a sixth-line being. The role model. The ultimate example. The ultimate example of what it is to live as yourself. And this can only be done through right action, and right action is not a concept. It can't be a concept. The mind is not connected to your feet. You can look at that chart endlessly and see that the mind has no access to a motor, that the mind can do dick. It's not supposed to. It's very good at juggling this and that. It's very good at feeding outwards. Right action is the action of the vehicle. It's about authority, it's about strategy, it isn't about anything else. I have this funny thing going on with the guitar player that I made my CD with. He knew me 18 years ago. And at that time, I wasn't busy telling people about human design. And I don't see him for 18 years. He's a projector. And, he's now very much back in my life, and he's devouring human design, which is really cute to watch. It's so astonishing to me. He's in his 50s. And for the first time in his life, he understands why things went the way they did. And he's a delightful man, and he's very bright. And there's this flood. He's a projector, and we know what projectors are like. They love to absorb the knowledge and reflect on it and go through all that process. And he keeps on sending me reams and reams of his writing. You know, he's busily asking me questions and all of this. And the other night, I got an email from him. And there was this whole long thing. And it suddenly made me very, very sad. I just had this image of what it means not even to have anyone in your life tell you what right action is and how you do it and how simple it is, how much it's on the surface. It's just a little thing on the surface. He said, couldn't you have told me then? And I didn't know how. I mean, it took years for me to synthesize the knowledge in a way that we could give techniques. And I look at that and I think, you know, it's so simple. And here's this guy so bright, you know, with his wife is a holistic health worker, and they know all these different blah, blah, blahs, and this and that and whatever. Right action is not about what the not-self mind tells you. It doesn't know. Right action is built into us if we just stop interfering and let right action happen as ourselves. And it was like, wow. There's nobody ever said that to me. Certainly no old friend of mine ever said to me, why didn't you tell me then? It was a very strange thing for me. And it really brought home over and over again that, you know, I don't care about all this minutiae. I only do it because it is my responsibility as a teacher to lay out the entire framework. But it's not what this knowledge is about. It's about the simple recognition that it is a very basic mechanic that changes your life. It's so simple. It's so much on the surface. And you see, this whole process of the experiential way, that its whole goal is that you will find your way through right action, because only then do we have progress. Real progress. You know, if I think about Rome 2,000 years ago, it's pretty much like Ibiza today. You know, there's a few different things. There isn't a hell of a lot of progress. There really isn't. Consciousness hasn't come very far since then. It hasn't. You know, what has happened is that we have had a growth of information. We have a fabulous collection of information without synthesis. Just stuff. So much stuff that you cannot digest it. And because there's so much stuff you cannot digest, and because there's so much stuff from people who claim that they know what's good for you, that nobody gets to operate according to their design. They operate according to conditioning. I mean, all you have to do is look at the body graph and realize that 70% of humanity have an open head center. 70% of humanity think about things that don't matter, and that's what runs their life. That over 60% of humanity has an open ego. So that most of humanity is running around trying to prove to everybody they're worthwhile by changing themselves so other people will accept them. There is no right action. And then we think we have examples of right action in front of us based on the moralities that grew out of our lack of awareness. And we set them up as examples. That some old celibate fart that tells people that they can't have an abortion is suddenly an example. Of what? Only within the context of the morality. Nothing else. Not my example. I'm my example. See, this is the power of uniqueness. The power of uniqueness to defy conditioning, because conditioning has no right to be your authority. No God, no government, no partner, no child, no anything. That's right action. And you don't get there by thinking it. Because most people say, well, I'm going to do it, and they don't even know what that is. was my old joke about people hating themselves. I used to say to them, look, get the joke. You're hating the wrong person. You don't know who you are. You've never lived who you are. You can't. You can't. Anytime you look at a chart and you see an open center, you see a wall that's standing between you and the truth. It's just standing there in the way. It's forcing you to look at things in a way that are not correct. I love this line of enforcement. You know? Because by the time you come off the roof as a 6-line being, you better be right action. And you better enforce that right action and enforce that right action in others. Yeah, we train all these kids to be alike. You go into a school. I know, I've been there. You know? Everybody gets taught the same thing regardless of their ability. You know? I mean, we're just homogenizing agents. We don't want our children to stand out and be different. We're afraid